The evening in California was quiet when my phone buzzed. My son's message appeared. "You won't be joining us. My wife prefers to keep this vacation to her own family. You've already paid for everything, so I froze the travel fund." They boarded the plane. The text arrived at exactly 11:02 p.m., crushing 3 years of planning, dreaming, and saving into a single moment. I sat at the kitchen table, reading glasses perched on the tip of my nose, the low hum of the refrigerator filling the room. I had just finished packing travel-sized sunscreen bottles into carefully labeled zippered bags for each grandchild. My fingers still sticky with tape from wrapping little souvenir bags, each one marked Aloha and Grandma loves you. The phone buzzed again. Another message. "Don't take it personally, Mom. It's simpler this way." I did not reply. I stared at the glowing screen until it went dark, then placed it face down on the table. No call. No thank you. Not even a word meant to soften the blow. Just a cold, quiet erasure. The woman who raised him, in his words, no longer part of her family. I had sensed change. It wasn't just the way Tanya, my daughter-in-law, corrected me in front of the kids, or the way she rolled her eyes when I shared stories from my honeymoon in Hawaii. It wasn't only how she started hosting holidays at her mother's house without telling me until the day before. What truly signaled it was the way she looked past me, not at me, as if I were invisible, like a waitress who had already dropped the check. Still, I never imagined Nathan would go along with it. He had written me Mother's Day cards that brought tears to my eyes. He brought me pink tulips every March, even after moving out of state. In 2nd grade, he drew a picture of me wearing a cape, captioned, "My mom saves the day." Apparently, I was no longer part of that story. I looked at the small duffel bag I had packed for myself. 2 sundresses I hadn't worn in years, a photo of my late husband I had planned to place at the dinner table, and a small box of matches for the lavender-scented candle I wanted us to light in his memory. I imagined us standing barefoot on the sand, the sun dipping into the ocean. I pictured my grandson holding my hand, asking, "Did Grandpa love the beach too?" And I would tell him that he did, enough to bring me there before we could afford it, and more because he shared it with me. But none of that would happen. I wasn't invited. I had paid for the beachfront villa, the flights, the transfers, the luau, the snorkeling, the breakfast baskets. I had spent hours on the phone with a travel agent, ensuring beds were soft enough for the kids and walkways manageable for Tanya's mother. And now, I was just a line item crossed off a list, the source of money that had quietly disappeared. I sat at the table long after midnight, the house dark, the soft under-cabinet lights casting shadows. For a moment, I felt not anger, not even sadness, but shame. The quiet kind that makes you feel foolish for hoping. I thought about calling him, even picked up the phone, but what would I say? That hurts. "I can't believe you changed." I could not plead. Instead, I walked to my den, turned on my old laptop, and opened a folder labeled Hawaii Travel Fund. There it was, $21,763.84, the total I had saved since retirement, from selling old furniture, tutoring at night, skipping small luxuries, every dollar set aside for this dream. I hovered over the freeze account button. One click could stop every payment, halt the transfers. But I did not click yet. I opened a blank document instead and began typing a new list. Women from my church who had been overlooked, unacknowledged, and forgotten. Carol, whose son had ignored her during illness. Louise, who had buried her husband last year. Frances, who had raised her grandchildren but wasn't invited to their milestones. Beverly, who never had her picture taken on a beach. I saved the file, returned to the bank page, and clicked freeze. Everything stopped. For the first time in 3 years, I imagined a different kind of trip, one where I was not unwanted, not a burden, not invisible, but the host. And I smiled, not out of revenge, but with clarity. finally free to choose where my generosity would go. The mason jar behind the flower in my kitchen cabinet had been my secret dream jar, where I tucked spare change and small savings. Over 3 years, it grew, quietly, into hope. I had canceled cable, skipped teas, tutored late into the night, all to build this dream. Hawaii wasn't just a destination. It was a promise. A promise to show my family the love of the man I had lost, to share his joy with the children. And yet here I was excluded, not just from the trip, but from the memories I had hoped to create. I closed my laptop, breathed in deeply, and for the first time let myself feel a small, clear sense of power. I could choose now whom to see, whom to include. The trip, the dream, the love I had invested, it would no longer be taken for granted. The next part will reveal how she transforms her pain into power, taking control of her dream and deciding who truly deserves to share it. The morning light came slowly through the kitchen window. I woke earlier than usual, not because I had plans, but because sleep had abandoned me. Nathan's words from the night before echoed in my mind. "You've already done your part by paying." Every skipped tea, every night spent tutoring, every moment of careful saving suddenly felt hollow. I hadn't been building bridges. I had been building a pedestal they had no intention of stepping onto. I moved through the house in silence, folding blankets, straightening picture frames, wiping counters that were already clean. The quiet clung to me like a second skin. Then I opened my email, thinking of a mundane grocery receipt, and froze. The final travel confirmation from the agency sat in my inbox. I clicked it, heart pounding. 8 names. 8 plane tickets, 8 bookings, 8 sets of luggage, but mine was nowhere. Not a single trace. I scrolled carefully, hoping for a mistake, some hidden 9th ticket. There was nothing. My presence, my effort, my hope, completely erased. I sat at the desk, staring at the screen. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a different thought began to stir. Not anger, not despair, but a clarity I hadn't felt in years. They had planned this vacation without me, treated my love as a transaction, my care as a credit card they could use and discard. I was not wanted, not for who I was, but for what I could provide. And I realized something essential. I did not have to accept that. I opened my banking app. My account, my fund, all $21,763.84 of it, intact. Linked cards all in my name. I had built this alone, for years, quietly, patiently. And now I understood. I was not powerless. The power had always been mine. My finger hovered over the freeze toggle, and for the first time, I didn't hesitate. One click, and they would discover their entitlement had limits. One click, and they would face the truth. Generosity is not owed. But I paused. Not out of fear, but because I wanted to be deliberate. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about teaching them a lesson or making them suffer. It was about reclaiming the respect and dignity I had earned. I opened another tab and began writing, not to Nathan, not to Tanya, but a new plan. Names of women who had been overlooked, underestimated, and forgotten. Women who had given everything without receiving acknowledgement. Carol, Beverly, Frances, Nora, Louise, 6 women who had spent their lives quietly giving to others, rarely seen, rarely appreciated. The choice was clear. The next vacation wouldn't be about repairing bridges that were never meant to hold me. It would be about building something new, something for those who truly deserved it. For the first time, the dream was mine to direct. I imagined us together, these women I had chosen, in a villa overlooking the ocean. Nights filled not with forced smiles or awkward silences, but with laughter and recognition. I pictured candles burning slowly on the table, one for each woman, each flame a memory, a tribute, a reclamation. And there, at the center, I would place the photo of James, my husband, the man whose memory had inspired this entire journey. He would watch over us, his smile a quiet witness to the power of choosing love, not obligation. I sat back in my chair and let myself feel the freedom, the weight lifting from my chest. I realized how long I had carried the burden of being the good mother, the generous grandmother, the one who never spoke up. I had given silently, always hoping to be included, always hoping my love would be enough. But love without acknowledgement is not love. It is a ledger, and theirs was already balanced against me. By noon, I had made my decision. I activated the freeze. All transactions paused. The linked cards disabled. No new charges could be authorized. They would discover the truth at the airport, at the check-in counter, when their confidence met the reality they had never imagined. And I didn't flinch. I felt only calm, only clarity. That evening, I packed a new bag. Not for them, but for the women I had invited. Sundresses, sandals, little gifts, a bottle of lavender-scented candlelight for the evenings we would spend together. For the first time, I packed with excitement, not dread. The dream I had nurtured for years was not gone. It had simply shifted its purpose. And for the first time, I realized this trip could be perfect, not because it included family, but because it included those who truly saw me. I sipped peppermint tea at the kitchen table, thinking about the waves of Hawaii, about James, about the children, and about all the women who had been quietly overlooked in the world. And I smiled, not because of what I had taken away, but because I had finally chosen where my love and effort would matter. In part 3, she will take the first bold step to reclaim her dream, reaching out to the women she has chosen, and the power of her quiet generosity will transform not just the trip, but her life. The next morning, I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The weight of expectation, of obligation, of years spent hoping to be enough, had finally loosened its grip. I opened my laptop and pulled out the list I had made the night before, the women who deserved to be seen. Each name was a quiet revolution, a reclaiming of love and attention that had been ignored for too long. Carol,
Beverly,
Frances,
Nora,
Louise.
Doy.
I began making calls, each one deliberate, careful, like stepping onto fragile ice. Hello. Carol's voice was hesitant. I could hear the question unspoken beneath her words. Why are you calling me? Carol, I said softly. I want to take you on a trip. To Hawaii. For a week.
No catch.
Just you and a few others who need it too. A stunned silence. Then laughter. A choked, joyous sound that made me feel lighter than I had in years. Are you serious? She asked. Completely, I replied. You deserve it. We all do. One by one, I called each woman, listening to disbelief, gratitude, hesitation, and finally acceptance. Some cried. Some laughed so hard I could hear them shaking through the phone. But all of them said yes. They wanted this as much as I did. Not for appearances, not for obligation, but for the quiet restoration of self-worth that comes when someone finally says, I see you. You matter. Over the next few days, I transformed my plans from a family trip into a journey of reclamation. Flights booked. Villa confirmed.
Private Chef arranget.
Beachfront, of course, because no one should ever have to settle for anything less than a sunrise over the ocean. I packed carefully, thoughtfully, each item a promise of comfort and joy. Sundresses, wide-brimmed hats, slippers, and a lavender candle for evenings when we would sit and speak memories aloud. I pictured us together in the villa, the 6 of us, barefoot on polished wood floors, framed by the open doors where the wind carried the scent of salt and flowers. Each night, we would light a candle, one for each woman, each flame a tribute to resilience, to survival, to a life lived fully despite being unseen. And at the center of the table, I would place James's photo, the man whose memory had sparked this adventure. His smile would anchor us, reminding us that love, true love, never needs permission.
Packing felt different this time.
Excitement replaced apprehension. Purpose replaced fear. I realized that the dream I had built for 3 years wasn't lost. It had simply found its true direction. And in that realization, I felt the power of choice. I had chosen who this trip was for. I had chosen who would feel welcome and valued. And in choosing, I had reclaimed myself. The day we were set to depart, the villa's windows framed a perfect sky. I drove with the women to the airport, the car filled with laughter, nervous excitement, and soft chatter. No drama.
No tensión.
No reminders of who had overlooked us. The airline check-in clerk smiled when I presented our tickets.
All set, she said.
And it felt like a small victory, a validation of the quiet courage that had brought us here. As we flew over the vast expanse of ocean, I watched their faces through the window of the plane, the anticipation, the wonder, the relief of finally being chosen for something that mattered. I realized in that moment that what Nathan and Tanya had failed to see was simple. Generosity is not measured by how much you give to people who take it for granted. It is measured by how carefully, how consciously, you give to those who recognize the value of what you offer. Arriving at the villa, we were greeted by the gentle sway of palm trees and the hush of waves curling onto the shore. I set James's photo in the dining area, framed in soft walnut. No one questioned it. No one asked me to move it aside. The space was ours. Every detail I had arranged, beds, meals, table settings, even the beach towels, reflected care, intention, and respect. For the first time, the trip felt real in the way I had always imagined, restorative, joyful, and deeply human. That evening, under the warm glow of hanging lights, I watched the women settle into the rhythm of presence. Carol poured wine with laughter in her eyes. Beverly toasted to finally being somewhere they didn't have to clean up after anyone else. Frances whispered stories to the sea breeze, letting herself be seen at last. And I sat there, finally released from the silent contract of being the giver who is never enough. In Part 4, the nights by the ocean reveal hidden stories, long-held secrets, and the true power of being seen. The women discover that healing doesn't come from apology. It comes from acknowledgement, presence, and shared memory. The nights at the villa unfolded slowly, deliberately, like waves folding into the shore. We lit candles each evening, one for every woman, and placed James's photo in the center, a quiet sentinel smiling over us. The flame flickered against the soft walnut frame, casting shadows that danced across the walls like memories being recalled. Each woman shared a story, not complaints, not regrets, but pieces of themselves that had been overlooked, forgotten, or silenced for far too long. Carol spoke first, her voice trembling at first, then steady as she recalled the years her children had missed Christmases with her, the holidays she had spent quietly, watching life pass by from the sidelines. She laughed softly, a sound that had the weight of years of invisible labor shedding off her shoulders. Beverly told of nights spent beside her brother's hospital bed, years of devotion met with little acknowledgement. Her voice was strong, yet tender, a melody of endurance and quiet heroism. Frances talked about the life she had shared with her late husband, the love that had shaped her even after his passing, and the times she had been present for her grandchildren but never truly recognized. Each story layered the room with emotion, a tapestry woven of resilience, grief, and love. These were not stories of bitterness. They were stories of existence, of women who had given and survived, quietly, without applause. I listened, letting their voices wash over me, washing away my own pain that had lingered for too long. And in the telling, I realized something profound. This was the family I had been waiting for, the one that did not see me as an obligation or a wallet, but as a person deserving of attention, respect, and love. It was a clarity I had never known before. The love I had invested in a family that didn't fully appreciate me had been a rehearsal for this moment. We spent hours on the beach, barefoot, letting the sand sink between our toes, letting the salt air fill our lungs. We laughed over memories and misadventures from our pasts, from missed buses to childhood mistakes, from lost opportunities to moments we had treasured alone. Each woman's presence became a mirror reflecting strength, a reminder that survival and joy could coexist. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, we lit the final candle. The lavender scent filled the room, a quiet perfume of remembrance and closure. Each woman spoke one word: strength, love, forgiveness, joy, presence, visibility, words they had longed to hear from the world, finally spoken aloud in a circle of recognition. I whispered James's name, letting it join the chorus. He was there, in the smile frozen in the frame, in the flicker of candlelight, in the gentle rhythm of the waves against the shore. We didn't compare scars. We didn't compete in pain. We simply acknowledged what had been and celebrated what remained: resilience, memory, and the quiet power of being seen. And in that acknowledgement, I felt the full measure of relief. Not the fleeting satisfaction of revenge, not the hollow echo of money reclaimed, but the deep, persistent warmth of dignity restored. On the final night, we walked along the beach in silence, the sky so close it felt like we could touch the stars. The moon cast silver upon the sand, tracing every line, every wrinkle, every story written into our lives. I looked around at the women beside me and realized that this, not the 3-year plan for a family trip, was the fulfillment I had been waiting for all along. This was the embodiment of care, intentionality, and love without expectation. The next morning, I awoke with the sound of the ocean still in my ears. I stepped out onto the terrace, watching the horizon ignite with sunlight. The villa was quiet, the women still resting, their laughter from the night before lingering in my mind like a gentle echo. I realized then that the true gift of this journey wasn't the destination. It was the reclamation of self-worth, of agency, of choosing to be surrounded by people who saw me. Returning home, the email from Nathan appeared in my inbox, tentative, laced with excuses and requests for a refund. I read it once, twice, and felt the familiar pull of expectation. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I did not reply. I did not explain. I had already spoken, in a way that needed no words. I had chosen presence over obligation. I had spent my love on those who recognized it. The rest I let go. The sun rose that day, bright and indifferent to past pains. I sat on the porch, coffee in hand, the gentle wind brushing my hair. I thought of the women, of James, of the waves, of the laughter, of the restoration that comes from being truly seen. And I realized, finally, that happiness was not in being included where I was once ignored. It was in choosing where I mattered, where my love was valued, and where my presence made a difference. In the final part, the journey concludes as the grandmother fully embraces her chosen family, redefining love, generosity, and legacy, showing that being seen and valued is worth more than any obligation or money ever could. The morning light spilled gently across the villa, illuminating the room with a warmth that felt like permission. Permission to breathe, to exist without expectation, to savor life without the weight of obligation pressing on my chest. I stepped onto the balcony, coffee in hand, watching the ocean stretch endlessly, waves curling and breaking with effortless rhythm. For the first time in years, I felt entirely present, not as someone waiting for acknowledgement, not as someone hoping to be included, but as myself, seen, valued, and unbound. The women had begun to stir inside, Carol's laughter echoed softly down the hallway as she called out to Beverly about breakfast. Frances's gentle humming came through the open window, mixing with the morning calls of seabirds. I stood for a long moment, letting the sounds of life wash over me, feeling the presence of people who had chosen me, who had arrived with hearts open rather than with agendas or assumptions. We gathered around the large dining table, the sunlight pooling over the surface like liquid gold. James's photo sat in the center, framed and glowing softly, a quiet witness to this reclaimed joy. The women moved about, preparing food, arranging chairs, laughing over minor mishaps, and correcting each other gently. I realized then that this was the rhythm of a family, not perfect, not scripted, but alive, deliberate, and sustaining. During breakfast, we shared stories. Not stories to impress, not stories to compete, but stories that mattered to each of us. Frances spoke of the times she had been invisible in her own home, of the nights spent comforting children not her own, of the holidays that had passed without acknowledgement. Beverly told of the decades of quiet work caring for her ailing brother, the sacrifices that had never merited applause. Carol shared the loneliness of being overlooked year after year. And as each voice spoke, I felt a quiet resonance in my chest. We were not alone anymore. Our memories, our love, our labor had found a space where it was treasured. We moved to the shore later that morning. The sand was warm beneath our feet, the water lapping gently at our ankles. I handed each woman a small shell, a token of this moment, a reminder that this week was theirs as much as it was mine. We laughed, we ran, we let ourselves fall into the kind of joy that comes only when pretense is gone and presence remains. No one was excluded, no one ignored, no one taking from another's pocketbook without recognition. That evening, we lit the candles once again. Lavender, soft and persistent, filling the villa with scent, memory, and ceremony. We spoke aloud wishes for ourselves, things we had longed to hear in our lives. I listened as the women each expressed gratitude for being seen, for being heard, for being chosen. I whispered a word for James, for the love he had given, for the family we had lost and now rebuilt in a new, truer form. The night stretched on. The ocean whispered, stars gleamed, and the villa glowed from inside out. I realized that love does not demand attendance. It does not require payment. It is neither obligated nor transactional. It is a choice, a presence, a commitment that can be given freely and received honestly. And I had finally learned to give it where it mattered. Returning home was quiet.
No fanfare, no Instagram posts, no recognitiam.
But the house felt lighter, as if my soul had brought back more than souvenirs. It carried the weight of dignity, of intentional generosity, of being seen for exactly who I was. I unpacked, but in my heart, I left traces of laughter, candlelight, and ocean breeze in every corner. Days later, Nathan's email arrived, polite, tinged with awkwardness, asking for reimbursement. I read it and let it sink in. For a moment, I felt the old sting of expectation, the temptation to justify myself. But it passed like a shadow across the sand. I did not respond. I did not explain. There was nothing left to negotiate, no bridge to rebuild with people who had chosen erasure over presence. My account, my love, my energy had already been redirected to those who understood its value. I returned to the shore near my home, watching the waves curl and fold. The wind carried a whisper I imagined was from James, from the women, from the sea itself. Freedom is earned in presence, not permission. I let it wrap around me, and I let go. I let go of expectations, of family dynamics that had diminished me, of gratitude demanded as a currency I had already spent without return. And in the letting go, I discovered a quiet, unshakable joy. The lesson, simple yet profound, settled in me. Love is not proof of sacrifice. Love does not demand compliance. It thrives in reciprocity, in recognition, in seeing and being seen. I had spent years investing in people who saw only the account and not the heart behind it. Now I had chosen differently. I had found those who valued the depth, the care, the devotion, and above all, the humanity in giving without expecting. And as I walked along the beach that day, toes pressing into warm sand, sunlight spilling across the horizon, I smiled. Truly smiled. Not the smile that masks disappointment or pain, but the one that carries the weight of survival, of reclamation, of joy reclaimed. I had learned that being forgotten is not the end of a story. It is the beginning of choosing a story worth living. And so I whispered softly to the waves, to James, to the women who had found their place beside me, and to the quiet strength inside myself. I am seen. I am enough. And finally, I am free. The story ends with the grandmother reclaiming her worth, her love, and her joy, teaching that freedom comes not from the recognition of others, but from the conscious choice of where your heart belongs.